If you've ever crocheted a disaster sock before, it probably wasn't your fault. They're too thick, won't stay up, and they're just downright uncomfortable. But this sock is completely different. It's just as good as a hand-knit sock. The yarn is the secret to this cozy, flexible, and functional sock. I used a yarn specifically for making socks, Hawthorne Speckle from Knit Picks. This crochet sock could and should be the last pattern you ever need for that perfectly fitting sock, like those hand-knit socks you love without the needles. So the first thing you need to do before you pick up your hooks is measure your foot circumference. That'll be around the ball of your foot, and measure the length. Use those two measurements and the size chart that's included in the pattern to determine which of the 3 sizes you need to make. Alright, these socks are worked from the toe up, so go ahead and grab the larger of the 2 hooks, chain 7. Now that's for all sizes. Then single crochet in the second chain from the hook, and in the next 4 chains as well. Then you'll make 3 single crochets in the last chain, rotating it as you go. Now you should be looking at the underside of the chain, and you'll make a single crochet in each chain on this underside until you reach the last one. Then make 2 single crochets in the last chain. Now for the toe increases, you'll need 4 stitch markers, and it's really best if one of them is a different color than the rest. So place the first different color marker in the first stitch. So that'll be the first stitch of the round, and that's why it's getting a different color marker. Then place a marker in the 6th, the 8th, and the 13th stitches. Now that again is for all sizes, and these will be your increase points for the toe. Now before we move on to the second round, there's one thing we need to talk about, which has to do with this stitch. In order to get this knit-like stitch that kind of mimics the stockinette stitch, the single crochets are worked in a different place than the V up at the top, like we're used to. Instead, they're worked right through the middle of the stitch. You'll need to find the V at the front and find the V on the back, and you'll want your hook to go through there as well. Now I will say that this round in particular is a little fiddly with this stitch. Since it's a small piece already and we just have 1 round of single crochets, it's a little harder to work the stitch where you need to, but it does get easier, I promise. So do your best to find the V at the front of that first stitch and poke the hook straight through to the back, and finish the stitch like you're used to. This is how all single crochets are worked for this pattern. So you'll make 2 single crochets in the first marked stitch, and then replace the marker in the first of those 2. Then make a single crochet in each stitch to the next marker. Speaking of the pattern, one quick word about that. You can view it completely free on my website, or if you prefer to have a copy to print, you can buy the PDF from my shop. Click down in the description for links to both options. You will need to have the pattern alongside you to follow along with this tutorial. And make 2 single crochets in the marked stitch, and replace the marker in the second stitch. Then go ahead and single crochet in the next stitch, and we have a marker here, so 2 single crochets in the marked stitch, This time, replacing the marker in the first. Then single crochet in each stitch to the next marker. Make 2 single crochets in the marked stitch. And replace it in the second. And then of course, 1 single crochet in each stitch to the last. The goal is to always have only 1 stitch between the markers. Something else to keep in mind is that your stitch count will grow by 4 stitches every time you repeat this round. So that's the toe. Repeat the last round until your stitch count matches that for your size in the pattern. Now, as you work through that repeat, I have a couple tips. First, crocheting tightly is your enemy when trying to crochet this wainscot stitch. The more relaxed you are, the easier it'll be. Now, don't be so relaxed that your gauge gets too loose, but pulling the yarn up to the level of the first loop will really help. So when you finish the toe repeat, it'll look something like this. You'll keep the beginning of the round marker, but you can remove the rest. It's a good idea to go ahead and weave in the tail here as well, because as you start to build on this sock, it'll be a little harder to get to. And it's also a great opportunity to correct any little holes that you might have from working in the chains. Next, the repeat is really simple. Just work a single crochet in each stitch until it measures the right length from the bottom edge of the toe. Now that measurement, as you would guess, is different for each of the sizes, so you want to check with the pattern to get the right measurement for your size. And this is what your sock will look like when you reach that point. Now from here, we need to start adding stitches for the heel gusset so it'll fit properly, and that requires us to add some more stitch markers. So if you're making the small size along with me, you'll mark the 10th, the 12th, the 28th, and the 30th stitches. But if you're making the medium or large, again, go ahead and check with the pattern because you'll mark different stitches. So this increase isn't much different than the toe increases. You'll start off making a single crochet in each stitch to the first marker. And then make 2 single crochets in the marked stitch. This time, replacing the marker in the first stitch. Then make a single crochet in each stitch to the next marker, and 2 single crochets in the marked stitch, and replace the marker in the second stitch you made. Single crochet in each stitch to the next marker, make 2 single crochets in the marked stitch, replacing the marker in the first stitch. Single crochet each stitch to the next marker, then make 2 single crochets in the marked stitch, this time replacing the marker in the second stitch. Then of course, make a single crochet in each stitch to the last. Now I know that round sounds incredibly wordy, but there really is an easy way to remember this. So the goal with the markers, this increased section, is to allow the space between them, so the number of stitches, to grow with each increase. Before we just wanted to keep 1 stitch between the markers, now we want that number to increase. So the marker is placed on the outer of the 2 stitches. Alright, for the next 2 rounds, you won't make any increases at all. You'll simply single crochet in every stitch. To continue with the heel gusset, you'll repeat the last 3 rounds, so the increasing round, followed by 2 rounds of just single crochet. You'll repeat that 5 more times, and that's for all sizes. And all of that together will increase your stitch count by 20. When you get that done, it'll look something like this. Next, we need to start planning for the afterthought heel. So to do that, we need to find the middle stitch of each of the gussets. That'll be the 7th one over from either marker. You'll place one of your markers there and remove the other gusset marker because you won't need that. And then of course do the same thing on the other side. So at this point you should now have 2 heel markers and the beginning of the round marker. And from here we're moving on to the sock upper portion of the pattern because this is an afterthought heel. We'll get to that part later. So make a single crochet in each stitch to your first marker. And then single crochet in the marked stitch as well. Then you'll chain a number of stitches to create the heel opening. So I'll chain 17 for the small size, but again, check with the pattern for the number that you should chain for your size. Then simply single crochet in the next marked stitch and single crochet in each stitch to the last. So that's our setup round. For the next round, you'll make a single crochet in every stitch until you get to the chain. And then make a single crochet in each chain as well. So one way to make sure you don't get off track here is to remember how many chains you made and make sure you have that many single crochet. Then single crochet in each stitch to the end of the round. And from here it gets pretty simple again. You'll just make a single crochet in every stitch and repeat that a few times. So check with your pattern. And this is what it'll look like when you get through that repeat. Go ahead and fasten off and we'll work an invisible join here. Run it through the next stitch under both loops of the V, then poke it down through the middle of the previous stitch. And that's it, it's an invisible join here. I'm also going to go ahead and weave in the ends. Again, it's easy to get to, so this is a good time to clean those up. So we're moving on to the cuff now. So grab the smaller of the 2 hook recommendations and fasten on in any stitch at the back. The number you'll chain for the cuff is size dependent, so you'll want to check with the pattern to see how many chains you need to make here to start the cuff. From here, you'll slip stitch in the second chain from the hook and in each remaining chain. Then we need to fasten it to the sock, right? So find the next single crochet over from your join and slip stitch there. Now for reference, I'm working the hook in the same placement as the stitch, so through the middle. And then turn your work so you can work back in the opposite direction. Working in the back loops only, slip stitch in each stitch. Then chain 1 and turn. Then slip stitch in the back loop only of each stitch. And slip stitch to the next single crochet. And that's the repeat for the cuff. You'll keep going like this until you have no more single crochets to slip stitch into. When you get to that point, you can fasten off and seam the 2 ends together. But honestly, you can do whatever seaming method looks best to you. Then of course, weave in the end. So at this point, the sock is almost finished. We just need the afterthought heel. For this, you'll grab the larger of the 2 hooks again and fasten on in this stitch right here next to the corner. And that's no matter which size you're making. So when you fasten on, you'll chain 1, but go ahead and single crochet there as well. That chain 1 won't count as a stitch. Then single crochet in each stitch until you reach the stitch before the next corner. So this one right here. Then insert your hook in that stitch, pull up a loop, insert it in the corner stitch, and pull up a loop. Then rotate your sock and insert the hook in the next stitch on the upper section and pull up a loop. Then yarn over and pull through all the loops on your hook. Then go ahead and put a marker in that stitch and continue with a single crochet in each chain until you reach that next corner. Just make sure you have the same number of single crochets as you had chains when you made the heel opening. But do stop when you have one chain left to work. From here, we need to make that single crochet 3 together again, so start it in the last chain. Then insert the hook in the corner stitch, pull up a loop, insert it in the first stitch of this round, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through all loops to finish the stitch, and place a marker there. Alright, so it gets easy again from this point on. Make a single crochet in each stitch to the one before the next marker. Then single crochet 2 together using the next stitch and the single crochet 3 together from the previous round. And place your marker in that stitch. Then we're working on the upper portion of the sock here. Make a single crochet in each stitch to the next marker and single crochet 2 together using your decrease stitch and the next stitch. And place a marker there. So that'll get you back to the beginning, and you'll just repeat that last round as many times as the pattern says for your size. A couple things to note here. If you're confused of when to start that single crochet 2 together, the goal is to always include a stitch from the lower portion of the heel. We have more stitches there, so we need to decrease that down a little bit more than the top. Also, every time you complete one of these decreasing rounds, your stitch count will be reduced by 2. There are stitch counts for reference in the pattern if you want to follow along with that, but honestly, don't stress about it too much. If your stitch count ends up being off by 1, it really won't make or break your socks, and it's not worth frogging the heel and starting over. When you finish that repeat, your sock will look something like this. There'll still be a little bit of an opening here. That's totally okay. The sock needs to stretch that much for a proper fit. So next, fasten off, leaving a nice long tail, and turn the heel inside out, thread the tail on your yarn needle, and you'll seam the opening. Now again, you can honestly take any seaming approach you want here, but I will say that I tried several different ways, and the whip stitch, catching both loops of the stitch on both sides, led to a cleaner looking seam on the right side of the sock. Plus, this ends up being a flat seam, so you don't have to worry about it bothering your heel when you walk on it. Now I will say this pattern really was challenging to design, probably more so than any other pattern I've made. But that's only because I wanted it to be better than any other sock you've ever crocheted, and I wanted it to be as comfortable and as functional as a hand knit sock. So if you did enjoy this tutorial and you love the pattern, do me a big favor and hit the like button. Happy hooking, and I'll see you in the next one.